All right, so I'd love to introduce our next speakers who are here to share knowledge on why authenticity is key to elevating your career. So we have LaFawn Davis, who is the Senior Vice President of Environmental, Social, and Governance at Indeed. She leads teams that focus on sustainability, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, accessibility, social impact, inclusive hiring products, and AI ethics. The focus of Indeed's ESG commitments are to close the opportunity gap, break down bias and barriers, and conserve the environment. She is a globally recognized operator with 20 years of experience serving in leadership roles at innovative Fortune 50, 100, and unicorn technology companies like Google, Yahoo, PayPal, and Twilio. Leveraging this experience, she brings deep expertise for transforming companies through driving results, creating a culture of psychological safety and belonging, and building high-performing teams. She was recently named one of Entrepreneur Magazine's 100 Women of Impact, which is an annual celebration of the women leading today's most influential, innovative companies and changing lives while they're at it. So thank you for being here today. She will be joined by our very own Sienna Brown, who is the Global Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Power to Fly, who is focusing on long-term impact and innovation with inclusive companies that elevate underrepresented talent so that everyone can thrive. LaFawn and Sienna, take it away. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Mariella, and thank you for that introduction. And LaFawn, let me just say, it is an honor to have you here. It is an honor to be kicking off today with just really elevating your voice experience and your realness with the team. So I'd love for you to just give a quick introduction to the folks who are watching in your own words. Who are you and why do you do what you do?
Well, that's a really big question, right?
To dive into it, to start off easy, right?
Let's start off small. So everyone kind of heard my bio, and it's always awkward to sit there and kind of listen to your own accolades, but at the same time, kind of go, okay, she sounds pretty awesome. So in my own words, I am born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. I still live here. I am thriving here. My family is here. My wife and I got married at the end of 2020. I have a 22-year-old son, and I'm just loving who I have turned out to be so far. I'm loving the woman that I've grown to be. I'm loving the leader that I've grown to be. And it's nice because I don't always recognize it. And I've had through, therapy, coaching, my family, my friends, my squad, my board of directors, have started to realize that kind of stepping into myself and understanding not only the power that I have, but who I've evolved to be has been a blessing that they've helped me realize. So hopefully I've done it justice for them in telling you in my own words who I am.
No, I love that. And LaFawn, I think something that's so beautiful about the introduction that you just gave is it's about who you are as an individual, right? I think a lot of the times we lead conversations or we think about our professional journey and careers as like, yes, here are all the accolades and like, I did that, right? But then also who have I become as a person throughout that journey? And so I guess I'd love to hear, and also just a quick shout out to any of you who are listening. If you have questions for LaFawn, if something comes up in conversation and you'd like for us to really touch on those, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll get them on our end as well. Let's talk a little bit about that importance of like who we are as individuals and how we show up in the workplace. How does that sense of authenticity and staying true to ourselves really have an impact?
Yeah, so I think this is something I didn't really understand a little earlier on in my career. I was really busy code switching, making sure, my father calls it being bilingual, right? Making sure that I am conscious of the audiences that I'm in, that I would conform in some ways to make other people feel comfortable. I would struggle with imposter syndrome. Like all of those things are really what kept me from thinking being authentic is actually part of what I bring to a company. It's part of what I bring to a role and part of what I bring to my leadership style for my teams as well. And it took me a little while to understand that because not to date myself, but I came up in a time where that's what you did. It was, work twice as hard to go half as far, make sure that you're speaking their language, whoever they are in the power structure. And that starts to seed a lot of things like self-doubt. And, I know I'm preaching to the choir, even to you or to everybody else that's watching, but when you spend a lot of time on those things, on self-doubt, on imposter syndrome, on conforming, on code switching, that's a lot of time and energy and space you cannot devote to being your best self. And so I didn't realize how much of myself I wasn't bringing to the table earlier on in my career. It is something that I've definitely understood in most recent years. And it really is core to who I am. I don't think I would lead my teams the way that I do. I don't think that I would be able to even think strategically about the work that I have stepped into if I wasn't authentic, if I wasn't who I am. I don't see the role that I have as something that I landed or a job that I interviewed for. I really do see it as an extension of me, right? ESG is around, saving people and the planet and products and all the P's that I won't continue to say because it's a tongue twister, but that is who I am. At my core, it's what I'm most passionate about. It's my calling. And so I think that authenticity, when you really figure out who you are and how you can bring that to the table, it shows up everywhere in your relationships, in your job, in all the things.
Cool. If y'all are not taking notes, I suggest that you do, right? But I think, LaFawn, you bring up so many important topics, specifically thinking about how oftentimes when we also look for the jobs that we want to be doing, specifically as folks who do have different parts of our identity, of being able to say, how are we also finding companies that support that elevate that as well? And I guess I know that you have done an amazing job at having a seat at the table and then building other seats for folks as well. And I guess I'd love to hear, for anyone who might be listening right now, who wants to show up authentically, who wants to say, how am I not being a chameleon, but I don't necessarily feel like I have the power, and like we all have power to do that, right? But you might not necessarily feel like I can stand up or I can talk about this. What would you share with people?
Yeah, so it is not always safe to do so, right? I would love for everyone to step into your power, figure out who you are, bring authenticity, because I really do believe it makes work better. It makes your life better. You should be able to shine. You should not dim your light for anyone. However, I am also a realist. I'm an optimist, but I'm a realist, right? And it's not always safe to do so. Sometimes you're not in a psychologically safe environment to show up as yourself. And again, it's not always going to be, sometimes a job is a job. And I'm realistic about that too, right? Sometimes you just need a job. You have bills. Adulting is really hard. But when you get choice, right now, the way that the job market is, it's really a job seeker market. It really is. There are, especially in the US, there are more jobs open than there are people available to work those jobs. We've had things like, I'm sure you've heard, the Great Resignation, and that's not just, for pay. People are demanding respect. They are demanding psychologically safe environments. They're demanding flexibility and, fair schedules and all of the things that I think maybe people didn't feel like they had the power to demand from employers, but you do. And so if you have choice, if you're in a space where you can choose what job that you have, then really take the time to understand what the culture is like. And I don't mean just look at Glassdoor reviews, or even on Indeed, we have company reviews, we have a happiness score to show how people feel at work, but really try to dig into the company. Are they working on things that speak to your soul? Can you talk to anybody who works there or used to work there? Just get a well-rounded understanding of, can I show up as myself? There's not going to be a perfect company. All companies have their issues because they all have humans. And so we're all flawed, right? But being able to get somewhere where you can thrive, I think is really, it's really important to be able to show up authentic. I can recall times in my career where I maybe haven't been in an environment that was necessarily as psychologically safe, and, feeling like this might not work out for me if I do this. But I also remember being in those same spaces and not really caring. at some point. Again, we're not always in this position. Not everybody can do that, but there comes a point in your life where you're like, does this company care about me like I care about it?
Yeah.
Would they replace me tomorrow if I left, or I go and won the lottery and I don't come back? How much am I giving of my heart, my soul, all the things, right? And you start to balance out what kind of environments you can actually thrive in. And so for me, being in a space where people let me speak my special language, I say things like stuffs and things and whatnots and isms and phobias, and right, not always speaking like the normal corporate speak. That is so freeing to me. And to hear other people start to say the nonsensical language is amazing. Being in an environment where I know that they see my authenticity as an addition to the culture is a beautiful, beautiful thing, right? You don't wake up feeling compressed and condensed. You'll find physically when you're in spaces where you cannot be who you are, you like listen to your body, right? You're tight, your chest tightens, you might have a little headache, a little migraine. You are tired, not just tired, you're exhausted, right? With exhaustion, no amount of sleep will help, because it's not about the sleep. It is about your full self. It is about the energy. So it really is, again, I know everyone isn't in this position, but I encourage everyone who is listening today to continue to seek to find those environments where you can be you.
I love so much about this. And like LaFawn, as you're sharing, it's making me think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how that's also applicable in the workplace, right? So for example, our physiological needs, so obviously making sure we have what we need to live on a day-to-day, but then also safety, but implementing that with the psychological safety in a team, right? Love and belonging, implementing that with belonging at a company, esteem, and then that self-actualization. And so I guess I'd love to hear from you. What would you, that was very aggressive. What I would love to hear from you, LaFawn. Let me take a step back, right? I'm excited. But what I would love to hear from you is a little bit about, for those, because I know that a lot of our community right now who might be listening might identify as Black women, women of color, people in the Black community, et cetera, but we also might have some allies. We also definitely have some leaders as well. And so I guess I'd love to hear from you. What can folks do to be able to create that space? Because again, you mentioned there's a big difference to be able to say what it feels like when I show up authentically or not, but how can we as an individual, being a part of those companies as well, create that psychological safety in our workspaces to hopefully have folks show up authentically, whether those are colleagues or leaders or anyone.
Yeah, I'll show you a real-time example right now. So as an ally to you, what you said was not aggressive. It was assertive, it was direct, right? That just created psychological safety between us. That is exactly how you do it. For the allies that are out there, for leaders, for Black women, women of color, you can do this for each other. You could do it for yourself. And psychological safety is different than trust, right? Sienna, you and I know each other. So I trust that if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. That's the kind of relationship we have. But psychological safety is, that the people you're talking to are going to give you the benefit of the doubt. You can ask questions without feeling stupid. You could push against the status quo. You can, generate ideas, right? And be innovative and know that the people that are around you are going to give you the benefit of the doubt. So the way to do that is to actually push against those stereotypes and biases that show up in the workplace to allow people to be their authentic self. So I just heard you say, oh, that was aggressive. No, it wasn't aggressive. And as Black women, right, we have to combat against the angry Black woman syndrome and about being aggressive or a little too direct or stylistically, maybe you want to change your tone. No. Right? No, everyone should be able to show up in a way that is authentic to them. And if your style is direct, right, I can appreciate that and also call out to everybody else what it was so that they're like, oh, okay. You might even feel, if we were in person, a collective sigh, right? Or a collective deep breath, shoulders drop, people get a little more tense, maybe lean back a little bit more, because what you're trying to create is a space where everyone stylistically can be who they are. And so that's a really, really easy way, I think, to create a space of psychological safety, and also actively show other people what it feels like, right? If you walk in every room and you're guarded, every single room, you're like, okay, I know they're already looking at me like you're different, and you may have the stereotype about you, but you know you're amazing, right? You know you're fabulous. And in my experience, again, not everyone has had this, but in my experience, when you walk in a room like that, knowing that you're amazing, fabulous, awesome, fantastic, all of the words, right? Other people will feel it too. But if you are busy kind of holding yourself into this little ball because you're unsure, then you're not safe. Other people aren't safe, right? It creates this space where active harm can occur. Active harm can occur just by that kind of dynamic of not being able to show up as who you are.
I love this. And you're making me, number one, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I actually want to pause and take a moment for anyone who's listening. We're getting a lot of people resonating, saying being yourself gets you closer to the roles and personal relationships that really suit you because it's the real you that you're bringing. Thank you, Cindy, for sharing that. LaFawn just wanted to bring that to your information as well. And we also got comments from Sierra Walton as well as Barbara Felton that were definitely saying you're on topic. I guess something that I want to lean into for the folks who are in the audience is thinking through a little bit around the idea of healing, right? Because again, I think sometimes having the conversation of how can we show up authentically in workspaces where a lot of the times workspaces weren't necessarily always meant for folks who look like us, right? So I think that there's this question, well, on both ends, right? So how do we kind of go through the healing process or the unlearning process? And LaFawn, something you mentioned is being able to have a seat at the table and show up exactly as you are, and then having that have a ripple effect, right? I guess maybe that was the answer, but outside of that, what else would you suggest for like this collective unlearning, right? Because again, for folks to be able to show up, it's going to take a lot of how do we start thinking differently, realizing that we need to be able to take action. And I'll pause there because I want to hear from you your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think that some of the first things that we have to do as a collective community, I'll say, is that we have to unlearn the things that we've learned. We have to unlearn it. There are tenets of white supremacy that we live through and perpetuate every single day, even amongst ourselves, right? The thought that we are less than, not better than, the thought that we need to prove much more than anybody else. There are a lot of things that we have to unlearn ourselves in order to show up that way. And I think one of the first things that you can do to help heal is to understand that you should be in an environment where you are celebrated, you are not tolerated. We are in a lot of spaces where we're tolerated, and the feeling is so different. It's so different when you're, okay, I know, okay, yeah, let me make sure that I'm not doing this or I'm not doing that, because you have this feeling of like being on thin ice all the time, right? Yeah. We have to unlearn that for ourselves, right? The power structure and the power dynamics that are in place are not going to give us that. We have to learn that internally for ourselves. And so you start to heal, to understand this is actually not me. The real me is not this. This is what has been told to me. This is what I've been indoctrinated into, right? But this is not me. And so you do have to go through, I think, some trauma and really move through that and understand, like, you, not to be cliche, but you really are your ancestors' wildest dreams. They never, ever would have thought, right, that their people would be able to do the things that we are now doing. And so I think tapping into that space, tapping into your ancestry, tapping into your culture, tapping into unlearning those very traumatic systems that have been put into place to make us feel inferior. Like, those are the things we have to heal from. And without that healing, we can't show up as our most authentic self. We're trying to survive. But what I would love for people to be able to do is go from surviving to seriously thriving, not only in the workplace, but in their own lives. Because there's no more work-life balance. work-life balance is like 50%, 50%, and right? That doesn't exist anymore. It's all about your life. You get one of those, right? And as Carla Harris says, who's one of my favorite people, this is not a dress rehearsal. Life is not a dress rehearsal. So you have to lean into yourself. You have to show up as who you are. You have to bring your goodness to the world, because we only get one of these. I mean, you might believe in reincarnation, but you get what I'm saying. The point is that we have to unlearn a lot to heal ourselves, which helps to heal our communities, which helps us to show up as who we are.
Yeah, I love that. And again, the ripple effect of how one individual action has so much more of an impact, right? And so quickly, for those of you who are in the audience, we have about 7 minutes left, and I really want to give y'all an opportunity to ask LaFawn questions. I have the honor of being able to do this on a frequent basis, but y'all have access to be able to do this now. So if anything is popping up for you, anything we're talking about that you really want to be hearing more about, definitely just let us know in the chat. And I guess, LaFawn, something I would love to talk to you about is, like, we're talking about the process of unhealing. We're talking about the process of also unlearning for ourselves as well. And I guess I'd really love to hear what would be, again, the first step for someone who might not necessarily have started that process yet, right? Because again, I think if you're in a place where you've started doing that work, it's addictive almost, of like, right, how do I continue becoming even more of who I truly am and who I always have been? But I guess for those folks who are like, oh, I still have a sense of imposter syndrome. I don't really believe that I shine and like my energy is what makes me special. So I guess what would be a quick tip that you could give to someone who might be struggling with either imposter syndrome or just finding their own in their personal or professional lives?
Yeah, you can. There's, I think, a lot of ways you can start. Pretty simple. You can wake up in the morning, whenever that is. I'm not even going to be like, wake up at 5 a.m. and because that's not me. But whenever you wake up in the morning, think about 5 things you're grateful for. Before you go on the gram or TikTok, before you look at your email, just think of 5 things that you're grateful for. Even better if you have the space or the capacity to write those things down, because that way you can chronicle your journey. You can meditate, which you could do in like 10 minutes a day, or pray if that's more your speed. You can do the things that make you more introspective, and it doesn't have to take like a long period of time, but you can start really, really small and you start to see the shift. And the reason I'm starting there is because it really does start internally first. You cannot look to these jobs, these companies, or anything around you to give you what you need to have internally. So that's why I'm saying to start there and start small. Just gratitude, right? And think about 1, 2, 3 things that make you special, not unique, right? Because other people might have the same superpowers that you have, right? But what makes you special? What are you bringing to you, let alone to the job that you have? You start there, and it is addictive, and you'll find that you want to learn more. You start to read more about energy and about authenticity and about trauma. And if you want to go even further, there are trauma coaches that can really help you step through. You talked about needs. Unmet needs can show up even in the workplace as like anger or rage or sadness. And you might not even know that you're showing up that way, but you're showing up that way because you have unmet needs. And so when you want to go deeper past literally just focusing inward on yourself, understanding yourself more, but you start to get deeper, you start to go through some coaching so you can really undo some of the trauma that you've had in your life, not just because of society, that's enough trauma, but also in your life, in your childhood, in your relationships, in your family, all of those things. When you unlock them little by little, then you start to step through the trauma and into who you really are.
I love that. And so thank you, LaFawn, again. And I just want everyone who is listening to just take note of that a little bit and be able to say, how can we all commit to something that LaFawn just shared for the rest of this week, right? Or at the beginning of an amazing week, or at the beginning and saying, okay, well, maybe it is sitting down and writing 5 things when you wake up in the morning. or journaling or taking time to meditate or whatever that might be for you. And then also, I just want to kind of call out, LaFawn, what you did for me earlier, which was fantastic, of me apologizing or like calling something that doesn't necessarily need to be called out and saying, let's pause, let's take a step back and realize that like that is not something that we need to be apologizing for, and having these conversations with ourselves, right? How often do we talk down to ourselves as well in the workplace, in our personal lives, and giving that sense of grace. So LaFawn, really quickly, just to continue with this question, hey girl. You're like, yes. So Ruby quickly asked, she was like, do you have any recommendations of either rejuvenating spaces or online spaces that you might recommend, or any books or podcasts, high level, no pressure.
No pressure at all. I started, it sounds cheesy, but I started kind of like with the Calm app, because I wanted to like get into my meditation space a little bit better. I grew up spiritual, so praying is easy for me, but meditating is a little bit different for me. And so lots of thoughts come in my mind when I try to quiet them down. I have a sound bowl, I do sound baths, things of that nature, because for me, that really helps me hone into my space. Starting off with some deep breathing. There's some great kind of exercises even on the interwebs that you can do, just some deep breathing and things like that. And I really recommend a trauma coach or a therapist. I had a coach that focused on epigenetics, which is generational trauma. And so I went from like, okay, deep breathing, meditation, and like, let's get in the work. Let's get in there. What are my ancestors saying? What did my great grandmama say? Like, what's going on? Right. So I, off the top of my head, I don't have like the podcasts and the books and stuff that would help, but I will try to send Sienna a list of things that could help if that'll help y'all. But it really, like, you could start small or you can go fully in the deep end like I did with a trauma coach.
I love that. And like LaFawn, the one thing that I would also add is like, if you are using meditation apps, et cetera, and you do happen to identify in a certain way, look for folks who are leading that also share that part of the identity, to be able to say like, how are we also not hearing this from a generalized experience, but more so with some of the different nuances that exist. LaFawn, before we hop off, number one, I just want to say, I really appreciated this entire conversation. I feel like I have all of the mental notes that I will now be writing down and putting into action. I'm sure that the folks who are listening do as well. But where can we find you? What are you up to right now? How can we continue being connected? Because this conversation was amazing, and I feel like folks will want to hear more about all of your brilliance.
So I am most active on the gram, because that one's just easy for me, right? So at the LaFawn on the gram. I'm on the Twitter, but I don't tweet that much, but I'm at LaFawn on Twitter as well. And then of course I'm on LinkedIn too. So happy to connect with you all in the mediums of your choice.
Well, I love it. I just want to acknowledge you again, LaFawn. Thank you for sharing your whole self, your authentic self, and for always being a beautiful guiding light of like what I know I aspire to be like. I want to be like you when I grow up, but I'm sure for many others who can also learn from your experiences. I'll rephrase that. I would like to continue being the woman who I am and using you as a light and example.
You knew it was coming. You knew it was coming.
So again, that self-correction, y'all. Let's all put it into practice. So LaFawn, thank you. Mariella, I will pass it over to you, and we appreciate you so much.